I need you to listen to me carefully, because what I'm about to say goes against almost everything people assume about witchcraft, demons, and spiritual warfare. When I was deep in the occult as a practicing warlock, we were never most afraid of pastors, loud prayers, anointing oil, or religious rituals. Those things didn't stop operations. Many times, they actually helped us predict behavior. What we were trained to fear was one specific Christian weapon, and most believers either underestimate it or use it incorrectly. That's why I'm speaking now. If you've ever wondered why your prayers feel sincere, but results seem delayed, why attacks intensify right when you start obeying God, or why peace shows up suddenly when you weren't even trying, this revelation will connect the dots. I didn't leave witchcraft because I lost interest. I left because I saw something I couldn't unsee. I watched assignments collapse, not slowly, but instantly, when certain believers activated this weapon without even realizing what they were doing. And here's the uncomfortable truth: darkness studies Christians more than Christians study darkness. We knew which prayers could be ignored. We knew which worship was emotional but powerless. And we absolutely knew which believers would cause problems the moment they entered a room. This video isn't meant to hype you. It's meant to arm you. Because if you are a Christian who has felt targeted, delayed, resisted, or pressured lately, there's a strong chance you already possess what witchcraft fears. You just haven't been taught how it actually works. This weapon doesn't shout, it doesn't panic, it doesn't beg heaven. It establishes authority, and once it's activated, darkness doesn't negotiate, it withdraws. In the next chapter, I'm going to expose what this weapon really is, why witches recognize it immediately when it's used correctly, and how misuse of it has kept many believers fighting battles they were never meant to fight. Stay with me. This isn't theory. This is testimony. Let me clear something up immediately, because misunderstanding this is why so many Christians stay exhausted. The weapon witchcraft fears most is not prayer by itself. It's not fasting alone. It's not worship volume, spiritual language, or intensity. Those are tools. The weapon is spiritual authority rooted in obedience and rest. In the occult, we were taught to monitor authority levels, not emotions. Someone could pray for hours and still have no authority if their life was fragmented, disobedient, or driven by fear. At the same time, a believer could say one calm sentence and entire assignments would collapse. That's what terrified us. Authority doesn't argue. It doesn't strive. It doesn't explain itself. It stands. We knew immediately when someone was operating from authority because resistance stopped being dramatic. There was no back and forth, no escalation, just withdrawal. Here's how we identified it. When a Christian stopped begging God to act and started agreeing with what God already said, the atmosphere shifted. when they didn't panic under pressure, when they didn't chase feelings or signs, when they obeyed quietly, consistently, and without needing validation. That obedience created jurisdiction. Darkness cannot remain where it has no legal right. Most believers think witchcraft fears loud warfare. It doesn't. Loud warfare often signals insecurity. What it fears is a believer who knows who they are, knows where they stand, and refuses to step out of alignment, even when nothing feels rewarding. That kind of Christian is dangerous because authority doesn't need energy, it doesn't need momentum, it doesn't need perfect circumstances. It only needs position. And here's the part people miss: authority increases when you rest in God's order instead of striving for control. We exploited exhausted Christians because exhaustion erodes discernment. But rest, true spiritual rest, strengthens authority. That's why Jesus slept in storms. That's why peace disrupts witchcraft faster than panic. In the next chapter, I'm going to reveal how witches test for this weapon, how they know when a believer doesn't have it activated, and the subtle behaviors that silently give authority away without people realizing it. This is where it gets uncomfortable, but freeing. This is where most Christians don't realize the battle has already started, because authority is almost never attacked directly. It's tested. In the occult, we didn't rush in with force. We probed. We watched reactions. We applied pressure in small, calculated ways to see what surfaced. Authority reveals itself not in victory moments, but in irritation moments. Here's what we looked for. The first test was emotional volatility, a minor disruption, a delay, a misunderstanding. If someone spiraled quickly, anger, anxiety, offense, we knew their authority was conditional. It depended on circumstances staying comfortable. Authority doesn't react, it responds. The second test was compulsion. We created urgency, made people feel like they had to fix everything immediately, explain themselves, prove something, or defend their position. Compulsion is a giveaway. When someone feels driven instead of led, authority is leaking. Witchcraft feeds on hurry. The third test was identity confusion. Subtle thoughts. Why is this happening to you? Did God really say? Maybe you missed something. If a believer started questioning their calling, their worth, or God's faithfulness under pressure, we knew the weapon wasn't fully active. Authority doesn't need reassurance. And here's the one most people miss: over spiritualizing everything. When someone saw an attack in every inconvenience, it signaled fear masquerading as discernment. True authority doesn't chase demons. It continues its assignment and lets resistance starve. We knew immediately when authority was present because our tests failed. Delays didn't derail them. Silence didn't shake them. Pressure didn't make them explain. They stayed steady, and steadiness is devastating to darkness, because when nothing works, no fear, no distraction, no confusion. The assignment collapses on its own. There's nothing to attach to. That's why some of you have felt tested lately, not attacked, tested. The irritation, the delay, the emotional poke, it wasn't random. It was checking for cracks. In the next chapter, I'm going to expose the most common ways Christians unknowingly surrender authority and how to reclaim it without fighting, shouting, or exhausting yourself. This is where the pressure finally makes sense. This is the part that hurts a little because most authority isn't stolen. It's handed over quietly through habits that look harmless. In the occult, we didn't need believers to sin loudly. We just needed them to step out of position. The first way authority is surrendered is through over-explaining. The moment a believer feels the need to constantly justify themselves to God, to people, to situations, they've already shifted from authority to defense. Authority doesn't defend its existence, it simply operates. We relied on that insecurity. The second way is delayed obedience. Partial obedience weakens authority more than outright rebellion. When God prompts and a believer hesitates, negotiates, or waits for better conditions, jurisdiction narrows. Darkness watches for that pause. That pause creates access. Immediate obedience seals doors. The third way is emotional agreement with pressure. Feeling heaviness is not the issue, agreeing with it is. The moment someone says, I guess this season is just hard, instead of, this pressure is temporary, they've interpreted resistance as reality. Interpretation gives pressure a voice. And here's the most subtle one, spiritual comparison. Watching others, measuring progress, questioning timing. Authority collapses when focus shifts sideways. We exploited comparison constantly because it pulls believers out of assignment and into performance. Authority is assignment, specific. Now here's the good news, and this is important. Authority is not lost permanently. It's reclaimed instantly the moment alignment returns. You don't need a dramatic prayer. You don't need deliverance. You need repositioning. The moment a believer stops explaining, resumes obedience, refuses interpretation, and returns to their lane, authority reactivates. And when it does, resistance doesn't argue, it leaves. That's why some of you have felt pressure lift suddenly before, without knowing why. You didn't fight, you realigned. In the next chapter, I'm going to reveal what happens in the spiritual realm when authority is fully restored and why breakthrough often follows silence, not noise. This is where momentum returns. This is the part we could never stop, and it's why witchcraft fears this weapon so deeply. When a Christian's authority is fully activated, the atmosphere doesn't become dramatic, it becomes quiet. In the occult, silence after pressure was the sign we dreaded most. Noise meant struggle, silence meant alignment. And alignment meant the assignment was already failing. Here's what happens spiritually when authority locks into place. First, resistance loses direction. Darkness operates on reaction. When a believer stops reacting, no panic, no emotional swings, no chasing answers, the interference has nothing to work with. Confusion dissolves, delays shorten. Things that felt heavy suddenly feel neutral. That neutrality is not emptiness, it's control returning. Second, clarity comes back fast, not gradually, suddenly. A decision you've been wrestling with for weeks becomes obvious. A fog lifts without explanation. You wake up one morning and realize the heaviness is gone. That's not coincidence. That's authority reasserting order. Third, favor begins to move quietly. Doors don't explode open, they simply open. Conversations shift. Timing aligns. Help shows up without struggle. Witchcraft hates quiet favor because it can't interfere without exposing itself. We relied on chaos. Authority restores order. Here's something most Christians don't know. Once authority is activated, darkness is no longer allowed to test repeatedly. Tests escalate only when authority is absent. When authority is present, repeated pressure becomes illegal. That's why some of you are entering a season where attacks stop feeling constant. It's not because you're invisible, it's because you're out of reach. And here's the warning I need you to hear. The greatest danger after authority returns is forgetting how it was restored. People get relief and immediately return to striving, explaining, comparing, or hesitating. That reopens doors. Authority must be maintained, not chased. In the final chapter, I'm going to show you how to keep this weapon active daily, without burnout, without fear, and without living in constant warfare mode. Because the goal isn't fighting darkness. The goal is living so aligned that darkness has nowhere to stand.